En esa tarde soleada, un evento familiar se convirtió en una pesadilla cuando unos 200 agentes de policías locales, estatales y federales invadieron una pista de carreras de caballos con vehículos militares, helicópteros y armas en mano. Los agentes usaron tácticas violentas y degradantes para detener de inmediato a todas las personas allí. Las personas fueron detenidas y atacadas con bridas durante horas, incluyendo niños sin acceso a la comida, al agua ni a los baños. Separaron a las familias de manera violenta y sin explicación. Los demandados justificaron ese uso de fuerza a malinterpretar una orden judicial que solo mencionaba a 5 personas sospechadas de apuestas sin licencia. Sin embargo, los agentes detuvieron a todos los que estaban presentes, arrestaron a más de 100 personas y la mayoría de los detenidos eran familias con niños sin ninguna relación con las acusaciones de apuestas. Simplemente estaban ahí para ver las carreras de caballos. Queremos ser claros sobre lo que esto fue. Un plan coordinado gubernamental para usar una orden de arresto como arma para encubrir la discriminación racial a gran escala. El verdadero objetivo era deportar a un gran número de personas inocentes, sin importar el costo humano, mientras sembraban el terror en la comunidad hispanohablante. Esta demanda busca garantizar justicia para los perjudicados y asegurar que una violación tan horrible de los derechos civiles nunca se repita en Idaho. También se trata de elegir responsabilidades a las autoridades locales, estatales y federales, así como a nuestro principal líder estatal, el gobernador Brad Little, quien se niega a asumir responsabilidad ante sus electores por lo que sucedió en Wilder ese día. Next, we will hear from Jen Rolnick-Borchetta, Deputy Director for the ACLU's Criminal Law Reform Project. In this role, Jen leads the ACLU's litigation challenging police misconduct. Prior to the ACLU, Jen spent nearly 20 years challenging police abuse, including leading the landmark case that proved that the New York City Department's use of the stop and frisk practice was unconstitutional. Jen?
Hello, and thank you. Thank you for your interest in this case. My name is Jen. My colleague Paul just shared what this case is about, and I'd like to explain how this case seeks to hold federal and state law enforcement officers accountable for targeting a Latino gathering for an immigration raid. On October 19th, families gathered at La Catedral expecting a typical Sunday afternoon, eating, watching the races, spending time with their children and their grandparents. Instead, hundreds of people, children and elderly included, were zip-tied, separated from their families, and detained for hours. People were threatened, searched, and interrogated, not about gambling, which is what the underlying criminal warrant concerns, but about immigration status. This looked nothing like a normal criminal warrant execution because it wasn't. Law enforcement knew this was a place where Latino families gather. They chose a peak time when hundreds of people would be present and used a narrow criminal warrant as a Trojan horse for what they really wanted to do, which is to round up as many people as possible for civil immigration arrests. This was bigger than any one individual officer or agency. It wasn't the result of a few split-second decisions on the ground. This was a coordinated and planned effort by ICE, FBI, Idaho State Police, and multiple local police departments to conduct immigration raids and arrests at any cost to those who were present. And you don't have to just take our word for it. As we show in our complaint, ICE later acknowledged in an email to all of the agencies that coordinated this raid that the operation, quote, wouldn't have been possible without everybody here, end quote. And our complaint shows that Latino detainees were treated worse during this detention than those who law enforcement perceived to be white. Law enforcement used racial epithets for Latinos. They suggested Latino detainees were undocumented based on their ethnicity. They used more force against those who they perceived to be Latino, and even denied water to Latino detainees while smuggling water to a white family that was detained. It can be very hard to hold federal officers accountable for civil rights violations in our courts because the primary civil rights statute that allows lawsuits is Section 1983, and that only applies to state action. This lawsuit is different. Our clients bring claims under Section 1983 and other long-standing civil rights laws that prohibit a situation such as this, where federal officers conspire with state law enforcement to deprive people of their civil rights. These are laws that have long protected against using the instruments of state power to violate civil rights based on things like race and ethnicity. Here, our evidence in the complaint shows that the federal actors targeted La Catedral because it was a largely Latino gathering, and they conspired with state law enforcement to use criminal warrants and state law enforcement power as cover for an immigration dragnet targeted at Latino families. From Wilder to Minneapolis to Chicago, federal agents are wreaking havoc on communities. Instead of condemning this violence, the Trump administration is encouraging it. This sends a dangerous message that these abuses are acceptable and that no one will be held responsible. There is no undoing the trauma inflicted on the families affected that day. But accountability is how we make clear that what happened in Wilder was unlawful and that it cannot become a blueprint for policing in communities across the country. We will not be silent in the face of this abuse, and we intend to prove with our clients in court that what happened in Wilder violated the Constitution and that no agency is above the law. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Finally, we are going to hear from the ACLU of Idaho's Executive Director, Leo Morales. Leo has been the director of the Idaho office since 2015, and his career has covered immigrant and farm worker rights. He is one of our bilingual speakers, so he will be speaking in both Spanish and English. Leo?
Thank you, Rebecca. Lo que ocurrió en Wilder tocó algo mucho más profundo, algo muchos habitantes de Idaho temen instintivamente. Un gobierno poderoso descendiendo sobre una comunidad con fuerza inmensa sin importarle la presencia de familia, niños y la Constitución. Yo soy un residente de Idaho y estoy muy molestado por lo que sucedió ese domingo 19 de octubre. Ninguna comunidad, ya sea Wilder, Twin Falls, Notice, Coeur d'Alene o cualquier lugar del país debería experimentar tal desprecio por la dignidad humana y violaciones de nuestros derechos constitucionales. En Idaho valoramos la familia, la independencia y la dignidad y la expectativa de que el gobierno dejará en paz a las familias a menos que tenga buenas razones por no hacerlo. Wilder destruyó esa expectativa. Vehículos blindados, helicóptero, armas desenfundadas en mano. Esto no fue sobre seguridad pública. La operación tenía en meta intimidar y arrestar el gran número de personas. Lo que sucedió en Wilder, sin embargo, nos afecta a todos los habitantes de Idaho, a todos los estadounidenses, independientemente de su afiliación política, estatus migratorio o ciudadanía. Cuando el gobierno pone a prueba los límites de su poder en una ciudad, establece un precedente de lo que puede ser en otras partes. Cuando amarran a niños con bridas de plástico y les gritan, cuando las protecciones constitucionales se ignoran, el daño se extiende mucho más allá ese día. Llega a todas las comunidades que se preguntan si serán la siguiente. Estoy preocupado por el daño físico y psicológico causado ese día, como la experiencia de la niña de 10 años que agentes de policía agarraron del cuello, la arañaron cuando intentaba de abrazar a su padre. O el niño de 3 años que no podía dejar de llorar por la escena caótica y el terrible frío de ese día. La libertad no es solo la ausencia del miedo, es la promesa que cada niño tiene una oportunidad justa de creer y tener éxito, de crecer, perdón, y tener éxito. sin ser aterrorizado por instituciones destinadas a protegerlos. En momentos como este, creo fundamentalmente en este país, en nuestra capacidad de trabajar juntos, luchar juntos y aspirar a vivir según los principios fundamentales de la Constitución. Este país todavía nos pertenece a todos, a las familias, a los trabajadores, a los niños que sueñan con un futuro mejor. Lo que ocurrió en Wilder nos desafía a estar a la altura de esta verdad. En este día anunciamos esta demanda para traer justicia a las familias afectadas en ese día. Gracias. Ahora voy a hacerlo en inglés. All right, now I'm going to do it in English, and I'm also going to do a Marco Rubio when he was young, which is I'm going to get some water before I continue. All right, folks, here we go. What happened in Wilder struck at something many Idahoans instinctively fear: a powerful government descending on a community with overwhelming force and a disregard for families, children, and the Constitution. I am an Idahoan, and I am vehemently upset about what happened on that Sunday, October 19th, 2025. No community, whether that be Wilder, Twin Falls, Notice, Coeur d'Alene, or any place across the country should ever have to experience such disregard for human dignity and violations of our precious constitutional rights. In Idaho, we value family, independence, dignity, and the expectation that government will leave families alone unless it has a good reason not to. Wilder shattered that expectation. Armored vehicles, helicopter, weapons drawn. This wasn't about public safety. It was about intimidation and arresting as many people as possible. What happened in Wilder, however, is about all of us, every Idahoan, every American, regardless of a political affiliation, immigration, or citizenship status. When government tests the limits of its power in one town, it sets a precedent for what it believes it can do everywhere. When children are zip-tied and screamed at, when constitutional protections are brushed aside, the harm extends far beyond that day. It reaches every community that wonders whether they might be next. I am disturbed by the physical and psychological harm caused that day, like the experience of that 10-year-old child who was grabbed by the neck and scratched by law enforcement when she attempted to hug her father. Or that 3-year-old child who would not stop crying because of the chaotic scene and the terrible cold weather. Freedom is not just the absence of fear. It is the promise that every child has a fair chance to grow and succeed without being terrorized by the institutions meant to protect them. But let me pivot. Even in moments like this, I believe deeply in this country, in our ability to work together, to struggle together, and to aspire to live by the core principles of the Constitution. This country still belongs to all of us, to families, to workers, to children dreaming of a better future. What happened in Wilder challenges all to live up to that truth. And together, through accountability and courage, I believe we will. Thank you. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Leo, for those powerful words. That concludes the presentation portion of this press conference. We will go ahead and open it up to questions and, well, answers. I think if you want to go ahead and raise your hand there, we also do have a Q&A box where you can click on it and submit your questions. Please do indicate who the question is for if you have a specific speaker in mind and which language you would like the answer in. So we will give folks a minute to answer those questions. All right, we will go, Sally, if you can unmute now, I believe, and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. This is for anyone looking for an answer in English. I'm wondering, have you found any evidence that Customs and Border was there?
This is Jen. I can answer that with, unfortunately, not a firm answer, which is that we are aware that some people think CBP was there that day, but we don't have confirmation ourselves. The witnesses and those who were detained were experiencing a lot of confusion that was created by federal actors because they were masked and they were wearing uniforms that were difficult to identify and wearing things like blue uniforms and camouflage uniforms that are worn across federal agencies in different contexts. So that's the information that we have.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally, do you have any follow-up questions to that?
Nope.
Okay. In that case, I will go ahead and move on to Kyle Fantasia with the Idaho Capital Sun.
Hi, I'm curious if you can speak to what information you've been able to obtain from law enforcement agencies about acknowledgement of the tactics they use or justification for them.
This is Jen. I can also look to answer that one. We were able to obtain some information from law enforcement agencies through records requests, including emails that they exchanged recently, and also information about what some law enforcement agencies sent to the raid in terms of their personnel, and that information is included in our complaint. We also, there, was a lot of reporting at the time and statements put out by many of the officials involved, both through written statements, through verbal statements to media, and through social media statements. And we have a number of those statements in our complaint as well. And law enforcement, the FBI and some of the state law enforcement agencies said that this was criminal warrant execution. As we've explained, this is not what criminal warrant execution looks like, so that doesn't line up. And ICE maintained that this was an ICE immigration raid.
Kyle, do you have any follow-up questions to that?
No, thank you.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Next, we will go to Becky Boone with the Associated Press. I will, there we go. You should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thanks, Becky Boone with AP. I am wondering, this looks like, although I'm not an attorney, that you're filing under the Bivens doctrine instead of the Federal Tort Claims Act. Am I reading that correctly?
No, it's actually neither Bivens nor FTCA. So this is under the Section 1983 and Section 1985 primarily, which is the Civil Rights Act of 1871. 1983, folks might be familiar with, is the main route to bring a lawsuit, usually against state law enforcement. So traditionally, when there's a civil rights violation, you can bring a lawsuit against the state law enforcement under Section 1983. But Section 1983 applies to any actor. So does 1985, which prohibits conspiracies to deprive people of civil rights. Both of these statutes, you can bring a claim based on conspiracy between federal actors and state actors where they shared a goal and they took action in furtherance of that goal, and there's significant state action. And so here, our evidence shows that the federal and state agencies closely coordinated and planned this event. We have that from information that was sent to us about their planning that we included in the complaint. They shared a goal that was immigration enforcement, that each of these folks that we've identified in the complaint were both focused on in advance of the raid and were celebrating after the fact. And there was significant state action. There were multiple state law enforcement agencies, and this would not have been possible, as ICE itself said, without all of those law enforcement agencies who themselves detained, round up and prevented people from leaving, and they brought people from detention, from where they were being held on the field, into an ICE interrogation tent where no one was allowed to leave until they verified immigration status. And so all of that action together brings this into a conspiracy claim directly under Section 1983 and 1985.
Gotcha, thanks. So, sorry, one quick follow-up,
Go
if
ahead.
I may.
Yes.
The Supreme Court last September overturned a California federal judge's restraining order on racial profiling in immigration actions there. Do you anticipate, I think at the time, though, Kavanaugh said that there could be a different outcome if force is used during those stops. Do you think that will have any impact on your effort in this lawsuit?
That was a concurrence in a Supreme Court decision. And even in that concurrence, Justice Kavanaugh said that actions that law enforcement take based on ethnicity or race can be challenged. And that is this case. This was activity that as we talk about in the complaint, it was targeted at a gathering where they knew that there would be a large number of Latinos because they were conflating people who are Latino with people who are undocumented. They were targeting them based on their ethnicity. This is exactly that type of claim here. It is an equal protection violation claim that these folks were targeted because of their Latino ethnicity. And so we think there's significant evidence here, and I will say this as someone who has a history of bringing claims about racial profiling and racial targeting, that I have never seen so much direct evidence of racial targeting as an ethnic targeting as I have in this case. Racial epithets, treating people who appear to be Latino worse, and the like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. Next, we have Rachel Spacek from Investigate West, and then we have a written question from Carrie Westenberg from the Star Tribune. So I will pass to Rachel next.
Thank you so much for doing this press conference and talking to the media like this. I just kind of briefly went through the complaint, and I know that there are several instances where you say local law enforcement coordinated with federal agents to conduct this raid. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, like if there are any specific things that they did to kind of coordinate, sharing information about community members or any other specific ways they coordinated. And that's for anyone.
I think maybe I should take it again. I hope someone else will cut me off and speak soon. And Leo and Paul, please say if you want to jump in. But what I will share some examples of the coordination from what we know, and we expect to know a lot more once we get into discovery in this case. What we know right now is that the Nampa and Caldwell police departments and the Idaho State Police departments coordinated with the FBI in advance of this raid, that they had several planning meetings, some of which were actually run by the state law enforcement agencies. And we know that in those meetings, they talked about both detaining those in the crowd and processing them. That's the phrase that they use, processing them, or taking them through the processing area. I think that's the phrase that they used, and that's in response to information requests that we made at the ACLU to these agencies. And so and that work also involved the Treasure Valley Task Force, which a lot of these agencies participate in all the time, and that's federal and state. And they're in this task force coordinating in order to advance shared goals. And so from that advanced planning, they took them through this processing area. Now, that was part of the plan. And the only processing area was a massive tent set up by ICE at the beginning of the raid, and through which everyone who was detained was taken, and they were asked about immigration. They had to verify immigration status, and then they were allowed to leave. Or if they didn't verify lawful status sufficiently for those ICE agents, they were taken away. And so that shows some of the planning. We also have statements that they made to each other on email, celebrating the outcome, which again was mostly immigration arrests and the detention of so many people who were completely uninvolved, and the charges for unlicensed gambling that they already had warrants for before doing the raid. And so these are examples. There is more in the complaint, but it's things like this that show both that they coordinated in advance for this immigration processing, and they coordinated during, we know, because of how they all brought people to be detained. They zip tied everyone, they held them on the racetrack, and then they moved them through this processing area through ICE tent and ICE interrogation and through what they said afterward.
Thank you, Jen. Rachel, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask maybe Leo or Paul to talk about any concerns from a community perspective about this type of coordination between local law enforcement and federal agencies like ICE.
Leo, would you like to take that, or I can begin?
Why don't you begin, and I may add, I'm not sure. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think what happened at Wilder and what we're seeing in other parts of the state is that the public trust in law enforcement is deteriorating because of this cooperation. Members of the Latino community now worry that law enforcement will turn against them if they need to report a crime. So the law enforcement will turn against them rather than be there to support them. So I think that is one of the most serious consequences stemming from this cooperation that we saw at Wilder and that we see elsewhere in the community.
Leo, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not too much, I guess. I mean, again, I'll go back to saying that it sets the precedent for this type of cooperation. If they can do that to one community, they can do that to other communities as well. And this is where, again, it's very important for us as Idahoans, as Americans, to ensure that we push back to protect those constitutional rights that every person has under the Constitution. So that's the only thing I would add.
Thank you. Rachel, do you have another follow-up to that?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I muted myself on accident. My apologies. So we have another question. So Carrie Restenberg had put something into the Q&A, and then Sally Krutzig with the Idaho Statesman has a question after that. So Carrie wanted to know what the timeline on the lawsuit is and what are the next steps.